Listener discretion is advised.
Yeah, we're ready.
All right. Well, you are listening to Whining Crime, the podcast where three friends chug wine, chat true crime, and unleash their worst Minnesotan accents.
Oh, you know it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. These are authentic accents.
They are.
Yeah. And
They
my mom's is getting stronger by the minute
Oh my
as
gosh.
she ages.
We went to
When
the bank the other day and we're in Minnesota and it's like the banker is still shocked.
Yeah. And how Minnesotan she sounded.
Yeah, it's so cute. I love it.
When I go home, it gets stronger for sure.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Proximity.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Who are you?
Oh, fuck it. I'm Kenyon.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Amanda. We are crushing it today.
It's winter. I decided to throw on a bold red lip because I didn't want to put on other makeup.
You're gorgeous. I have a
I
really
love
cool
it.
pimple right here on my lip, so I'm just not wearing
Oh,
any
yeah.
makeup.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I got some good ones happening. Whatever,
Love
it's
that.
fine. Fuck it, I don't care.
Fuck
I'm
it.
glad that middle parts are back. And also oversized crew neck sweatshirt.
Yeah, what a gift.
And leggings.
I'm
Oh
also
my
in an
god.
oversized crew neck and the leggings I slept in last night. It's 6 p.m. the next day.
You know
It's
what?
in.
This is the new suffragette
Ugh,
wardrobe.
good.
Because that is the theme of this episode, brought to you by our very special fan picker, Annie Davis, or maybe Ani DeFranco.
Ani DeVis.
Ani Davis.
Love it.
I need to go listen to some Ani DeFranco.
We all do.
Always.
Yes.
So good.
That's your prescription
Mhm.
to be filled.
So I'm calling you Ani now. Ani has
Done.
selected the topic of suffragette crimes. I always get confused if it's supposed to be suffragette or suffragist.
Or just suffrage.
We'll get to it, actually.
Suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Constant
to it.
suffering.
Well,
Crimes.
in the
It's
meantime,
not got nothing to do with suffering.
I know. I just am suffering.
Oh, okay.
in the meantime, Amanda, what is our wine crime pairing for suffragette crimes?
You know, this pairing kind of sums up how I feel about the suffrage movement perfectly. So I love it. It's also from our amazing friends over at Winc Wine Club, which is the greatest thing since
Ever.
the right to vote. This is an online wine club that delivers wine to your door or a Walgreens just over the border if you have one of those states.
Yep.
Kenyon. I'm pointing
You
at
still
Kenyon.
don't have the right to
I don't-
drink wine in a box.
I don't even know if Kentucky is in the direction I'm pointing, but go far enough in one
There's
direction,
no
you
way
might
to
end
know.
up in
It's not.
Kentucky.
It's that way to you.
It is. It's this way. It's where I am.
No, you're still whatever.
I mean,
I
I
know.
don't think I trust anybody's.
This way. And
Point
north,
anybody's
behind
input.
you.
and north
You've
is
got it.
always straight up.
Yes, it's south of you.
I'm south. Okay, anyway. So we still
Brady
have
Bunch rules.
Yeah. I still have pretty amazing access, and by I mean all of us, but I just said I for some reason, to this amazing discount code for Winc.
Yes.
If it is your first time ordering from them, go to trywinc.com/wine and crime special because you get 4 bottles for $29.95 and free shipping.
Woo!
That's like
Mm-hmm.
a
And
hell
all
of
of
a
the
deal.
wines, all the wines are really good.
They're so
all
good.
the wines are in like beautiful, cool, interesting bottles.
Mhm.
They're the
Yep.
best.
And today we are drinking the 2020 Sister Snake Grenache.
Yes.
Ooh,
This is
sisters.
a Western Cape, South Africa Grenache.
Nice.
She's a beaut. I am not going to attempt to open it with a hair straightener. Just going to do it the
Yeah,
old-fashioned
don't ruin
way.
that bottle.
Nope. Not going to do that.
About that.
I'll
I am
never forget.
Going to open it with a sword.
Oh my gosh.
Saber.
I've been watching so many sabering videos because it's like right around the holidays.
I've been
Everybody's
watching
drinking
so
champagne.
many scissoring videos.
Same.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
kidding.
Careful not to get cut with broken glass in either of those situations.
True.
This is a medium-bodied, fruit-forward red. She clocks in at 13.6% ABV, and you're going to get some nice, like, black pepper off of the Grenache. This is 100% Grenache, my angel.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Very cool bottle.
It's gorgeous. She's balanced out with some blackberry. You're going to get a little eucalyptus on the nose, some, like, deep red cherry. But it is nice and balanced. It's earthy. It's a little woody. And it should finish pretty dry.
Cool.
So it's honestly like a perfect, especially holiday foods kind of wine. It's going to taste good with like gingerbread.
Oh, anything eucalyptus around the holidays, I also really love.
Just,
Yeah, it's a very holiday-ish
it's perfect.
thing.
It's perfect.
I am also drinking a South African wine right now.
Yum. Pinotage.
Yeah, it
Knew
is.
it. I know this girl.
I'm drinking my girl Kim Crawford.
Got
Yeah.
to. Kimmy, I'm opening it up with our limited edition Wine and Crime Gals iridescent wine key.
So
Would you
good.
Look at
How
that.
freaking cute is she? I can't even.
I love these. They're so sturdy. And like Amanda said, limited edition. So
Yeah.
get your mitts on one of these.
We should make a limited edition Wine and Crime hair straightener so that people can open their wine with that. You know, just a thought.
I love it.
Just a thought.
That also has a corkscrew so you can take out the remnants.
Yes. A tiny bit of tweezers so you can get your stray hairs and your stray cork.
Wine and
Those
Crime
long
limited
tweezers.
edition cork tweezers.
Cork
That
tweezer
come
hair
with
straightener.
Protective goggles,
Yes.
a roll of paper towels,
Burn cream.
burn cream, a glove.
A glove and ace bandage. This will be very
Neosporin.
expensive, but I'm here for it. All right.
Yeah,
Shall-
it'll be a bundle.
It's a gift box.
It's a bunch.
Shall we pop?
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh, that
There's
was
a little. I got a little drip on my microphone. Oh,
Should have had that roll of paper towels.
It's not the first time. It won't be the last.
it's not. And I'm pouring it into a copper cup because all of my wine glasses are dirty. This is depression, people.
Nice pop.
Oh yeah, nice pop.
I know. We're
I'm
all
fine.
doing great, and the fact that the sun sets at 3 p.m. now is
2:30.
not affecting us even a
Does
little
it ever
bit.
come up? I didn't notice that it was up. I feel like I live in
Sometimes
the
it's
Arctic
down
Circle.
before I'm up.
Honestly, we like always have our shades down just because nudity in my house is prolific. And so there will be days in the winter when I forget the sun exists.
Yeah.
That's not great for your brain.
I wonder why my vitamin D levels are just.
We like crack some slats for our plants, and I need to like sit in the crack
You
slat,
need to
the slat
treat
crack.
yourself as good as you treat your houseplant.
Honestly, I
Right.
do. That
You
would be
need
an
to-
improvement.
Also, poor pets.
Pepperoni's fine, and Callie goes outside.
Unlike
Do
her
you?
mom.
I plead the fifth.
Anyway, so
Okay.
let's move
Cheers,
on. Cheers.
Fellow depressed people. Happy December. Ugh.
All right, Lucy, what is our background
Oh,
and
that's tasty.
probably not psych for Suffragette Crimes?
There's no psych. Oh, I gotta get my bones.
Oh, shake 'em.
People
I
new
don't
to
know
the
why
podcast.
I put them away.
Yeah, leave them handy. People new to the podcast, if Lucy's segment does not contain psychology about the crime, then she shakes her jar of goat bones.
My cactus-shaped jar of goat
It's
bones.
such a cute little
It doesn't
jar.
have to make sense.
No.
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 Keep up.
Keep up. Glow up. So suffrage is, in representative government, the right to vote in electing a public officials and adopting or rejecting proposed legislation. In nearly all modern governments, suffrage is considered an inalienable right that adheres to any adult citizen. In democracies, it is the primary means of ensuring that governments are responsible to the governed.
In
So-
theory.
All of this is
Nailing
within theory. We'll fucking get to it. Don't worry. I'm gonna hand you a soapbox.
Oh, yeah. We know.
Don't blow your load.
Yeah.
I mean, we all will take
We'll
our
get
tiny,
to
our
it.
little soapboxes, I'm sure, in all of our segments. So buckle up, people.
Yeah.
Strap in.
Yeah. Strap yourselves in.
Mother
Mother's
will kill us if she
coming.
finds out. That
All right,
would
so-
help with my depression management. I need to watch Mommy Dearest.
Oh.
Yeah, that always helps.
It's a holiday
Always.
film.
It is. It's a Christmas movie. Fucking don't at me.
It's even more a Christmas movie than Die Hard.
More.
In my opinion.
Absolutely.
And more than fucking It's a Wonderful Life.
Oh, yeah.
They're equally as depressing and horrible.
Right?
Yeah. Barely has to
Fucking
do with
hate
Christmas.
It's
How
a
does
Wonderful
Jimmy
Life.
Stewart get all the attention? Wow, I'm dying.
Ick.
That movie sucks.
Never
I'm fully
seen it,
Team
never
Penny on
will.
Oh, it's garbage.
It's horrible.
Although the Nick Cage remake with Téa Leoni is pretty fun.
Okay, so I also
City
just
of
realized
Angels?
Let's make Ryan.
I
I also get
City
It
of
was a
Angels.
joke. Sorry,
it's-
we're getting loopy.
I get It's a Wonderful Life and Life is Beautiful mixed up
Yeah.
just in
Basically
title.
the same movie.
Equally
Saving
depressing.
Private Ryan,
Nazi Germany.
being John Malkovich.
Life is Beautiful is an actual good film, but they're
Very
both
sad.
really depressing, but
Mm-hmm.
sold to us as like uplifting. But
Yeah.
actually, like 99% of the movie is soul crushing.
Yeah.
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 Anyway, it's fine. Sorry.
Okay,
We're
so
doing great.
obviously there are a lot of exceptions to this whole fairness, democracy, blah, 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 that I just said in the U.S. and abroad, but talking about the U.S. both today and historically. At some time or another, American citizens have been denied their voting rights because of religion, property ownership, race, and gender. We're going to circle back to this, obviously. It wasn't until 1870 when, thanks to the 15th Amendment, formerly enslaved people were granted the right to vote, although a number of states, particularly in the South, shocker, made that pretty fucking hard through things like poll taxes, literacy tests, constitutional quizzes, and grandfather clauses.
Mhm.
It wasn't
And
until
it was only formerly enslaved men, as we will get to.
Well, right. So my next sentence. It wasn't until the 1960s with the 24th Amendment and in conjunction with the Voting Rights Act that American adults who were Black, Indigenous, I always say Latinx. That's not right.
Latinx.
Latinx.
And other-
Latinx.
And other people of color were fully guaranteed the right to vote on paper anyway, which like gerrymandering and all that intimidation.
There's still not
yeah.
fully.
there's
Follow Stacey Abrams. That's all I gotta
Yeah.
say.
Queen
That
Tell you
Abrams.
everything you need to know.
That is
Yeah.
why, like, well, I'll wait.
Just wait. You're gonna have plenty of time.
I'll wait.
But we also aren't talking about that today. We're talking about ladies, and in particular, white ladies. So let's bring it back to that scene in Mary Poppins when the mom is like all about votes for women and marching around the house in her sash, singing the Sister Suffragette song. Do
Very
you know
cool
what I'm talking
sash.
about?
Oh yeah, obviously she's putting the
Iconic
sash
scene.
on the.
So I have
cook.
I have the lyrics. Feel free to chime in.
Oh God.
Cast off the shackles of yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our daughters will adore us, and they'll sing in grateful chorus. Well done, well done, well done, well done, well done, Sister Suffragette.
Yes! Woo! I
Well
knew
done.
more of those words than I was anticipating knowing off the top of my head.
I was never a Mary Poppins gal. I didn't know any of those. I think I've seen it like twice.
What?
There's like kind of
Yeah.
there's the things we remember about that movie from like when we watched it as children, and like under underpinnings of like social unrest
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
that I never picked up on before.
It's a deeper film than it got credit for when we were 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do remember penguins and some walking on the ceiling.
I feel like you would love that movie. I feel like it's right up your
I
alley.
think the walking on the ceiling was bed knobs and broomsticks. It wasn't
No,
even
no.
Mary Poppins.
No, it happened in one scene in Mary Poppins.
You had
too.
to think happy thoughts, and then you would laugh and you would float up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
It was about drugs and drinking.
Yeah, pretty much.
Isn't that Willy Wonka?
It's not one. There's more than one movie that's ever done
There's
that.
a lot of floating. They figured out how to do floating special effects.
Yeah, it got real popular for like a stretch.
I don't remember that in Mary Poppins at all, but that's okay. They're all
did
the
it.
same. They're all the fucking same.
Being John Malkovich.
Okay.
Life is beautiful.
So that
Dead Poets
watching
Society.
that scene is the first time. Poor man's Jake Gyllenhaal. That's the first time I remember learning that suffragettes were like a thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
The official activism movement began in the early 20th century in Britain. A suffragette refers in particular to members of the British Women's Social and Political Union, or the WSPU, a women-only movement founded in 1903 by Emmeline Pankhurst, which engaged in direct action and civil disobedience. Their official like slogan eventually was deeds, not words.
Yeah, they went for
They
it.
fucked shit up, and
They
we'll get to
literally blew shit up.
it. Well, we'll get to it, huh?
Yeah.
I should also note now that that this portion is very like Western centric.
Mm-hmm.
Like the women being denied the right to engage in civic action is like
A worldwide.
a worldwide thing.
Yeah.
But today I'm just covering basically Britain and the United States, but I'm not purposely discounting movements
Right.
elsewhere around the
Right.
world.
And there are also lots of societies where, like, in the past and in other, cultures, women did have more rights and
And then it was
We'll
revoked
get to
under
that,
new
too.
leadership.
action.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. I could note here, though, that the reason why this popped up in Britain at this time is because New Zealand was actually the first, just say modern colonized society that gave women the right to vote.
Mhm.
So that was in like 1893, I think. So right after that, particularly the women in Britain who were like, well, you're, part of our
Yeah. How come they can
empire.
vote?
How come they get it and we don't? So that's why that ramped up in Britain at this time.
Mhm.
So the name suffragette was actually written by a man reporter for the Daily Mail in 1906, intending to belittle the women advocates. And instead, they adopted it as the title of their WSPU newspaper. So fuck that guy. And in response to Kenyon's question earlier, a suffragist is like anybody wanting the right to vote. But he was trying to be like, oh, women want it? Okay,
Right,
you're
now you're a
suffragette.
suffragette.
Yeah. You're basically a rockette when it comes to civil disobedience.
Exactly. A powder puff.
Mm-hmm.
Which also, the powder puffs at our high school were badass. I feel like that was another kind of term that's like...
Oh, I don't think they still call it that anymore, do they? Maybe
I have
not
no idea.
widespread.
I didn't follow football of any variety then, and I certainly don't follow it now.
Yeah.
Well, no. Now, absolutely not. But I think there are a lot of phrases like that for any group that was marginalized in whatever sphere we're discussing, that they kind of embrace those condescending monikers.
Yeah, nasty woman, which is still the name of my Wi-Fi network.
Take the power back. All of your neighbors know which one is yours, by the way.
Oh yeah, trying to explain that to the electrician and repair people in South Africa. When I was
Just don't worry
network
about
name, nasty woman, and they were like, Because they had no idea that it was related to Hillary Clinton.
Like,
they were like, not
is your
following-
shower broken?
Yeah, like really, they were like, oh, you can see
Okay.
though. They definitely all thought it was sexual.
What's your OnlyFans account name?
And I had to be like, no, it's pro Hillary Clinton. And they're like, nasty.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Pat you on the head.
Yeah.
So deeds, not words, indeed. The suffragettes heckled politicians. They tried to storm Parliament. They were attacked and sexually assaulted during battles with the police. They chained themselves to railings. They smashed windows. They carried out a nationwide bombing and arson campaign.
Love
And
a good
face-
arson campaign.
Depends on the motivations, but yes.
If
And
it's a
face-
Fox Christmas tree.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. People are
No
very
notes.
upset.
I didn't do it.
I didn't do it either, but it happened.
Well, they should have watered the tree a little bit better. And they faced anger and ridicule in the media. So, like, PR-wise, very divided.
Mm-hmm.
When imprisoned, they went on hunger strikes, to which the government responded by force-feeding them.
Oh, yeah. We'll get to that.
Are you
Excellent.
doing a case out of Britain?
No.
Okay.
I'm doing the fan pick case.
Oh, okay. Because there's, how am I blanking on this person's name? That is like horrible. I almost covered them, but they were one of the suffragettes in Britain at this time and also ethnically Indian, but also like very highborn and like a goddaughter of Queen Victoria or something. And they just have a crazy wild story, and I heard about it on my God, I have the worst memory of all time. Whatever, it doesn't fucking
there were
matter.
a ton, like when I was going through these articles, almost every single woman that they mentioned had like a link to a separate article.
Yeah.
Like so many of these women who participated in this particular group had like incredible backgrounds, and they just did like the most amazing things. And obviously we'll get to the problematic stuff, but yeah, I mean, to do any of those things, you'd have to be very strong, very motivated. Like they really were
really
incredible,
fucking brave.
Yeah.
Very
really fucking
brave
fearless,
women.
some of this
Like
shit.
when you talk about like force feeding, like force feeding is
It's torture.
really
Yeah.
violent. Yeah.
Literal torture.
So here is an excerpt about one of the bombs in their bombing campaign, and this is from a newspaper published in April 1913. Quote, policemen discovered inside the railings of the Bank of England a bomb timed to explode at midnight. It contained 3 ounces of powerful explosive, some metal, and a number of hairpins. The last named constituent, no doubt to make known the source of the intended sensation.
Sending a message.
And ribbons.
Yeah. Glitter.
And then corsets rain down.
Buttons.
Whale bones.
That would be
Epic.
badass.
Yeah, one.
So the bomb was similar to that used in the attempt to blow up Oxted railway station. It contained a watch with with attachment for explosion, but was clumsily fitted. If it had exploded when the streets were crowded, a number of people would probably have been injured.
Which obviously we don't endorse that. But because nobody was injured in these bombings,
It's fine.
I don't think injury and death and like maiming was really their
Point.
goal.
Right.
No, it was to cause a stir, and it did.
Yeah.
And
This was
nobody
a
got
PR
hurt.
This was a PR move. One notably violent episode was the death of suffragette Emily Davison. Davison? Is this the fan picker's last name? Oh no, Davis.
Davis.
Oh yeah,
Devis.
Devis. Ani Devis.
The
Close.
Devisi code.
Emily Davis was a badass, very militant activist. She was arrested on 9 occasions. She went on hunger strike 7 times and was force-fed on 49 different occasions.
Jesus. Ugh.
Yeah. On June 4th, 1913, Davison attended a prominent derby carrying 2 WSPU flags. During the race, she ran out onto the course, possibly with her flags. I'm not quite sure if she had her flags on her, if the intention was to, like,
Probably.
put a... I read in one of the articles that her intention... excuse me, was to, like, strap one of the flags onto the horse. So the horse would effectively, like, be waving
running
their
around.
banner.
Yeah.
That would be tough to pull off.
You have to be
Yeah.
a really good horse girl
Yeah, well,
to pull that one off.
didn't work either way. She was struck by a horse named Anmer, which belonged to King George V. And Anmer was running at about 35 miles an hour. So if you can... She got
Anmer.
fucking
Basically,
railed.
she got basically getting hit by a car.
Yeah.
So she was knocked unconscious. She was at least, like, hit by the horse. I don't
Yeah.
think the horse stepped on her, but it might have, like, kicked her, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
That's-
any impact at that speed and
Oh, you're totally.
It's a horse. Yeah.
It's a horse. It's pure muscle.
Mm-hmm. So she was knocked unconscious, and she later died at the hospital from a skull fracture. And her death was ruled due to misadventure.
Okay, well, that's how I want to die. I want that
Kind
on
of a
my death
really
certificate.
cool reason of death.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a fun fact. The WSPU created and sold a board game to raise money. This board game was called Pankasquith.
love it, need it, put it in my stocking.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The name was
Squiff.
The name was
Swift.
derived from Pankhurst, who was the founder of the WSPU, and the surname of Prime Minister H.H. Asquith, who was largely hated by the movement. Like, he hated the women's suffragist movement, was not into it. So
So
this
why
board
call
game-
it Hurst and just call it Pankasquith?
I like Pankasquith. It's fun.
It's memorable.
It sounds like a condition that I would have as a diabetic.
Do not take Pankasquith if
You're allergic to Pankasquith.
So this board game was set out in a spiral, and the players were required to lead their suffragette figure from the home to Parliament. And you had to pass obstacles from Prime Minister H.H. Asquith and the Liberal government.
Oh,
So it's like Candyland.
that's amazing.
like political Candyland.
That's really cute.
I know. Also in 1909, suffragists Daisy Solomon and Elspeth McClelland tried an innovative method of potentially obtaining a meeting with Asquith by sending themselves by Royal Mail courier post.
Love.
Oh my God, I would not trust USPS
No.
nowadays.
Well, Downing Street did not accept the parcel. McClelland is known to history as, quote, the human letter.
Okay.
And I'm
Love
also
it.
not sure why Daisy Solomon didn't get a cool moniker, but it probably was because she was less prominent because McClelland was like a very well-known architect.
Mm.
So,
Cool.
you know, and
Also-
a human letter.
Love the name Elspeth.
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 Mm-hmm. Jumping right over the pond to the United States because a lot of bullshit went down here as well.
Mm-hmm.
The demand for women's suffrage began to gather strength in the 1840s, emerging from the broader movement for women's rights. In 1848, the Seneca Falls Convention, which was the first women's rights convention, passed a resolution in favor of women's suffrage, despite opposition from some of its organizers who believed that the idea of women's equality was too extreme for some of them.
There are always going to be people within the movement holding the movement back.
I mean, yeah,
I
there,
still think it's too extreme, honestly.
I know.
there might have been organizers who weren't necessarily in favor of passing this resolution.
Mhm.
Like, not that it wasn't important, but maybe they thought that the resolution or like, okay, absolute 50-50 equality is just a
little much.
Maybe we could do
Well,
like
I mean,
60-40.
well,
I know there were
who,
people who were like women who were against the, and we'll kind of get to it, an amendment to the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s because they if they were treated exactly the same as men, they would also lose certain protections that only women got and that men didn't receive, like in the workforce and like with the
There are
military
still
and shit
people
like
against
that. 1,000%.
the Equal Rights
So, like,
Amendment. Yeah.
It makes, I get it, but at the same time, it's like, you got to take the good with the bad if you want things to be.
And like, of course, we're looking back at this 150 plus years later and being like,
lens.
too extreme.
Right.
But really at the time, you know, and like you think of things happening today, it's perfectly logical in today's context to be on the fence about certain things.
It's basically the same issue as like discussing whether defund the police is like the right slogan or not. You know, like it at the time sounded extreme coming out of nowhere. And there are people who are like, well, from a PR perspective, maybe we should like start slow and like go piecemeal and go step by step and like work towards blah, blah, blah. Like it's the same.
There are also
Humans don't change. It's the same fucking shit.
There are plenty of movements we're going to look back on years later, 100 years later, and go, wow, why was this so hard to get on board with?
Well, we won't because we will be mercifully dead.
Gleefully dead.
oh, gratefully
Mercifully dead in 100 years.
Well, at least for this specific example, there are also a lot of nuances happening at the time. Keep in mind, this is 1848. This was a while ago. So, okay, we'll kind of get back to it. The first national suffrage organizations were established in 1869 when two competing organizations were formed, one led by Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and the other by Lucy Stone and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, who I know Kenyon's covering, so I'm not going to get into her story because it's really fucking cool. I'll let Kenyon do that. After years of rivalry, they merged in 1890 as the National American Woman Suffrage Association, or NAWSA, which I will be referring to it as from here on out, with Anthony as its leading force. Subsequently, the organization filed several lawsuits in the early 1870s and thought that they were really making progress with this. Susan B. Anthony actually voted successfully in 1872, but she was arrested and found guilty for it, which made headlines and all over the country and reinvigorated the movement. So it wasn't really that bad of a situation at the time. Yeah. In 1875, the Supreme Court ruled against the group, so they began a decades-long campaign to amend the U.S. Constitution to ensure suffrage for women. So the suffragettes did a lot of boots on the ground, very persistent, very brave, difficult work that we are grateful for today. But to cast the movement as progressive is discounting a whole lot of racism, anti-Semitism, colonialism, and a bunch of other ugly isms that need to be addressed in order to see the full picture of the suffrage movement and its effects. So, for example, Susan B. Anthony joined with NAWSA leadership to adopt a platform of states' rights. So, you know, the dog whistle for pro-segregation racism, among other things.
Yeah, she was
a mess. As was Elizabeth Cady Stanton.
Yeah, a lot of them were a fucking mess.
As was the woman I'm covering today.
Yeah.
We'll get to Elizabeth Cady Stanton. So they sided with these certain political issues, number one, because they didn't affect them or their peers personally. And number two, their priority was to advance women's rights. And they had to get certain parties on board with that. So they did this in order to try to lure the South into supporting their cause. So they're like, we don't want all women to vote.
Right.
They're like, don't worry.
Yeah. Wink, wink.
Well, to have an amendment to the Constitution pass, you need 2/3 of states to vote in favor of it. So, like, they literally, I mean, they didn't have to court the South in this way, but, like,
there weren't many other ways to do it.
Right. Mathematically.
Right. Yeah. So
not excusing it, just saying.
No, but that was
the
their
context.
reasoning.
Yes, that's the context of the tactic that they're using.
Yeah.
Which is rooted in racism and white supremacy. Obviously.
So here we go. This was in response to the passage of the 15th Amendment, which again allowed black men to vote, but not women, not any women. Elizabeth Cady Stanton has this whole back catalog of racist public statements, and here's a quote from a book called Elizabeth Cady Stanton, An American Life by Lori D. Ginsburg. Quote, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's positions on the relative worthiness of Black men and white women as citizens
Off to a great start. Let's start ranking
relative
people.
worthiness of
No,
human
that's literally,
beings.
she was comparing Black
I
men.
know.
Black
we know.
women weren't even on the table.
Oh, yeah.
It was white women and Black men.
Yeah.
It
That's
was
what it was.
the 2008 presidential election all over again, where people were just like, who do you think will defeat oppression first? It's either Black men or white women, and it's a horse race, and there can only be one.
Woof.
Yep. So her choice of all too familiar racist language had broad and lasting consequences, both theoretical and strategic, for the movement she helped to lead. By claiming that some American citizens were more worthy of rights than others, Stanton helped lay the groundwork for a defense of women's rights based on race, respectability, religion, and class that would be hard to shake. Shirley Stanton and Anthony understood this when they reported on the formation of a White Women's Suffrage Association in Washington, D.C., or admitted that the proposed 15th Amendment rouses women's prejudices against the Negro. Well, that was a quote. While increasing, quote, his contempt and hostility toward her as an equal. Furthermore, this appeal to prejudice, whether intentional or not, worked. One woman wrote Stanton and Anthony's newspaper, The Revolution, to declare that she had, quote, never thought or cared about voting till the Negroes began to vote, but now, quote, felt my self-respect rise. If Black men can
she's
vote,
she's so
can't
horrified.
I?
Exactly. Now she's moved to action because how dare Black men get the vote before her?
It's also
Exactly.
a divide and conquer strategy, because it was like, well, we don't want to give everybody power, so we're going to divide this movement that had been kind of commingling in the abolitionist movement and suffrage movement together, not like peaceably, but they
We
had
can't
been
win
working.
them all. Let's split
together.
this down the middle.
Yep.
Yep, exactly. So she went on, quote, if educated women are not as fit to decide who shall be the rulers of the country as field hands, then where's the use of culture or any brain at all?
Jesus
One might as
fucking
well
Christ.
have been born on the plantation.
Woof.
Wow.
And I gotta say here too, yes, there's strategy behind this. Like Kenyon said, we're gonna divide and conquer. But that said, the racist overtones that
it's rooted in
enveloped
racism. The strategy
everything-
is just a bonus.
every single aspect of this society at this time in this country among white people. This was not outrageous.
Right.
This was
Well,
not an
also-
outlier.
Like, something that intersectionality teaches us is that, like, yes, there are these multiple identities, but also these multiple identities can't exist without the other. So, like,
You can't just
racism
leave one in the dust to get what you want. Like,
and
that's
one
the whole,
can't exist without another one existing. So, like, racism couldn't exist if misogyny didn't exist, and vice versa. Like, it all is part of a system of oppression.
It's
and
a
it
wheel.
all correlates. Yeah, exactly. It's like, if
It's a
you're
fucking
going
wheel.
to oppress one group, then you could then everything else is just window dressing. Like, you could oppress any group.
Okay, so all that said, Elizabeth Cady Stanton and her contemporaries, like I just said, were far from outliers when it comes to universal discrimination and the suffrage movement. And this is, I'm going to end with a really good quote from a PBS article, which is in my citation notes if you're interested.
Your side piece, PBS.
PBS is my side piece.
yeah,
know.
Britannica's your bottom bitch, and PBS is your side piece.
Oh, Corey's home.
And Corey's your husband.
The back door slams.
That's it.
The big PBS head just runs through the backyard.
Clutching shoes and clothes.
Gotta go a bra.
His jeans.
God, I have
Dangling
literally
belt,
done that.
slapping his
Anyway,
ankle.
Barefoot.
getting flashbacks.
Someone listening, can you illustrate the PBS head just making a break for it with clutching all of their clothes?
Okay. Through the sliding
Dark
glass
hangover
doors.
circles under their eyes. Their eye.
Yeah, it's just one eye. Okay, quote, the women's suffrage movement was inspired by indigenous civilizations in which women often held leadership positions inside and outside the home, to what we were saying earlier. Additionally, the women's suffrage movement had its roots in the abolitionist movement. Initially, women, free people of color, and enslaved people bonded over a mutual desire for suffrage. Women were often invited to speak at abolitionist group meetings, allowing them to utilize their platform to call for change. Frederick Douglass, ever heard of him? If not, he was an abolitionist and reformer.
And
Was one of
excellent writer, so read his shit.
Was one of the 31 men and the only African American present to sign the Declaration of Sentiments at the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention in 1848. He also established the American Equal Rights Association alongside Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, the two that we were talking about, well, all this racial remarks. Also, yeah, like we said, Frederick Douglass is a black man. So at this time, they were in cahoots. So they all joined together advocating for universal voting rights. While the 15th Amendment prevented the U.S. government and states from denying citizens the right to vote based on, quote, race, color, or previous condition of servitude, it did not include sex as a protected category. A deep divide in the suffrage movement emerged and expanded. Recognizing that the South was still recovering from their loss in the war, grappling with a future without slavery, and a lack of support within the U.S. Congress for universal suffrage, some black suffragists, including Frederick Douglass and Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, advocated for the endorsement of the 15th Amendment as it was written. Many white leaders within the women's suffrage movement felt betrayed, and their reactions exposed their racism and elitism.
I mean, it's also like, yes, it didn't include sex, but it doesn't say men. It says citizens. Like, all of this is just a fucked up interpretation of the Constitution to begin with.
I mean, I feel like they maybe on some levels intentionally left it vague.
Oh, yeah.
Left it up for debate to see how things kind of shook out.
Maybe. I mean, when the Constitution was first written, I don't think it was really conceivable.
Well, we're talking about this amendment, not the Constitution.
Yeah.
This is just the 15th Amendment.
I'm just saying, like, I think it's, especially right now with, like, what's going on at the Supreme Court now, it's, like, really important to think about how much hinges on the makeup of the current court at the time and their personal interpretations and readings of the exact text, because a lot of things when you're in the moment and in the time period you don't realize are interpretive, but are completely interpretive and therefore like subject to change. Sorry, I'll stop.
I mean, you won't, but it's okay.
It's fine. I just have very little left to go. Okay.
I just have very little left in my tank, but it's fine.
I'm just running on empty here. Okay, continuing the quote. The suffragists shifted their focus to single-mindedly pursuing voting rights for white women. Leveraging their power and privilege, they made a conscious decision to exclude BIPOC women from their movement. In the end, women's rights to vote has long-standing effects on society. By the way, this is me talking now. It's the end of the quote. Studies have found links between women's suffrage and things like increased spending on schools and an uptick in school enrollment. And one study found that as American women gained the right to vote in different parts of the country, child mortality rates decreased by up to 15%.
Wow.
So There are a bazillion reasons why women need representation in government. I don't think we need to run through the list.
Right.
First of all, it's just equality. But secondly, it has very real world effects, like literal decreased death rates.
So when was it? Oh my God, this is embarrassing. Was it the 21st Amendment that women were granted the right to vote? What amendment were
The
women
19th
granted?
Amendment.
The
that
19th
was passed
Amendment.
in 1920
Okay.
granted white women the right to vote.
Well,
And then-
okay. So here's the thing. Like, again, back to this like interpretation issue. Like the 19th Amendment granted, like technically granted all women the right to vote. It didn't say white women. It was interpreted to only be white women, and also like ancillary laws state by state and discrimination prevented women of color from accessing the ballot box. But
So-
they had the right to vote.
Well, they were black more than they were women.
Right.
Right.
So these rules like the poll taxes and the literacy and the blah, 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 the Jim Crow, the whatever, none of that got taken care of until the Voting Rights Act in the 60s.
Exactly. But I feel like it's important to draw this distinction because while it's necessary to like not just say like, oh, well, women have had the right to vote for 100 years. It's like, well, actually, no, a lot of women haven't. They've had the positive right to vote, but fucked up state laws have prevented them from being able to exercise that right. And that process is still happening today.
Yeah, very much so.
And that is why it's so important to recognize that it's not just like, okay, well, we passed this amendment and they have the
It's
right
over
and
now.
therefore it's done.
Right.
They're always going to
reason-
find ways to fuck that up. Always.
Right. I just feel like, I don't know, am I making any sense about drawing that distinction? It's like when people say like, well, the 19th Amendment granted white women the right to vote.
I mean,
It's like-
I get what you're saying, but also like I get that language isn't in that constitutional amendment, but it's also, it needed to be distinct to omit any kind of like basis of religion, sex, race,
Discrimination.
create discrimination, because there were other things existing in the Constitution that work hand in hand with the 19th Amendment that did explicitly exclude black people, indigenous people of color. So like those amendments are exist on the same plane, and because the 19th Amendment was reached like with an active knowledge that this amendment as written, even vague without saying white, would only grant white women the right to vote.
No, because it happened after the 15th Amendment. You know what I mean? So like what I'm trying to say is if there weren't other discriminatory laws put in place, chronologically, the 15th Amendment granted men of color and formerly enslaved men the right to vote, in theory, not in vast practice. And then later, the 19th Amendment granted, as it's written, women the right to vote. So at that time, women of color should have been allowed to vote and technically were allowed to vote. They didn't have any kind of real access
They didn't
to
have
vote.
they didn't have like constitutional
Their
protection
right-
from states' rights
Yeah,
at that
their-
time under
their
the 19th or
rights
any amendment.
Existed and were being
Right.
actively denied to them through these other state laws.
Right.
Which
For
were,
example, Jim Crow stuff.
Exactly.
Exactly, which were patently unconstitutional.
But
And that is still
that's
happening
true.
now.
And on the unfortunate reality of like the majority of the suffragist movement is that like white activists during that time were aware of those disparities,
Yes.
and aligned
And
with
not doing
anti-blackness
enough.
and
Yeah.
racism to get what they wanted, and we'll kind of get to it in my case too, and like made promises to women of color that then
They fucking...
the second they got the right to vote,
Yeah.
were like, well, bye.
Oh, we're good. Bye. Never
Yeah.
mind. Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
it's just like, it's more complicated than the amendment says only white women can vote. You're absolutely right about
Right.
that.
Well, there's all sorts of nuances. And I think a way to sort of leave this would just be a reminder that laws and legislation are living. They're
Right.
fucking alive. We deal with it every day. I think it's a cop-out when people say, oh, I don't get involved in politics. Like, okay.
What a
That is-
privilege.
It's being shaped every single election, every Supreme Court nominee, every single amendment that's
It's like-
passed. It evolves. It's living. So you have to pay attention. You have to protect these rights because they are not guaranteed for the
And
rest
they
of
can-
your lifetime or generations to come. They're
They can
really
be
not.
withheld through interpretation and stupid, shitty state laws. They can be reinterpreted. They can be rescinded. And we will get to that in my case. And like, you know, think about like Reconstruction right after the end of the Civil War. There were, you know, a spate of like black, I don't know about senators, but like Congress people and like locally elected officials who were black men in the South. And then all of that
Stripped
backslid
of all of it, yeah.
and then they couldn't even vote for decades.
So don't take any of this shit for granted, people. Yeah. It's important to know our history. Obviously, there's problematic elements of fucking everything. So it's good that we're addressing these, that we're discussing these.
Yeah, we can't just idolize a movement and not like, you know, it's like idolization politics. Like we're supposed to have a critical eye
right.
about these things because these disparities exist. And if we don't acknowledge and confront them, then they'll continue to exist.
Yep. All right.
I think we've
We're
said
off
what
to
needs
a
to be
really
said.
good start. Oh,
My
do
face-
you? Because
Look
we
at
haven't
my
even
face.
gotten
Look at how
started.
red my face is right now.
really red.
My face is bright red. I'm like amped up. All right, let's cool down and hear a quick.
Canyon, get a ice water.
I'm gonna get some water. I had less than one glass of wine.
I've had like 2 sips of wine and then immediately got heartburn. So we're doing great over here too.
So, are we ready for my case?
Yes.
Never.
So,
I don't know why you ask.
Lucy referenced this person a couple times at the top because she was very important and influential.
Very important.
And also a woman of color and an abolitionist and a suffragette and a brilliant writer and just an amazing human being. So Frances Ellen Watkins and then later Harper was born in Baltimore in 1825. And at that time, Maryland was a slave state. But Frances was born a free child to free parents. But both of her parents, and I couldn't actually find their names, and some say that their names have been like lost to history, died in 1828, which left Frances an orphan. I think she was around 3 years old. She was taken in by her maternal aunt and uncle, Henrietta and Reverend William J. Watkins, who gave Frances their surname. Reverend Watkins was a prominent figure in the community. He was a civil rights activist and abolitionist, in addition to serving as a minister at the Sharp Street African Methodist Episcopal Church, which I didn't know that Methodist and Episcopal could be together in one thing. I thought those were different things.
Never understand anything.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like a
Ever.
slash. Like,
Yeah.
what the fuck is the difference?
True crime comedy.
Right.
Yeah.
I like Catholicism is like the extreme, and then everything else is just sort of the same.
Zach, as a Jewish person, he like just considers all Christianity Catholicism.
Right.
He
Oh,
just,
no.
Yeah, I know. He like
And all Jews are Hasidic. Okay.
I know.
Yeah.
But I know. It's totally, yeah. So he'll like constantly be like, oh, well, you know, the Catholics. I'm like, they're not Catholic. They're fucking Baptist. Like it's not. Anyway.
Bless his heart.
Yeah. So it's all what you know, right?
Yeah.
So, again, Reverend Watkins, her uncle / new father figure, also ran a school called the Watkins Academy for Negro Youth, where Frances would be educated until she was 13. And Reverend Watkins was like very caring and like attentive, but also like very strict and had like very high standards for his students and especially for Frances, and was like a bit of a taskmaster, but obviously like it paid off for Frances. He just had like super, super high academic standards for people going through his school.
Well, which I'm sure you kind of had to for
It's his daughter in his school.
and you know, as Black folks living in like,
There was a lot of pressure to
right.
be the best one could be because there was a feeling of like representing an entire community. So at this point, as was typical for the time period, Frances left school to find a job. She found work as a nursemaid and a seamstress for a white family that owned a bookstore. And this gave her the opportunity to continue her education like on her own in her free time. So she spent basically any spare time that she had in the bookstore reading and writing. So it was a very ideal job for her as a teen.
Yeah, I'll say.
I know. Lucy's like, I want to work in a bookstore.
Yeah.
I do. I've
If you
always
can't get
wanted
your
to
job
work
at
a
the funeral
bookstore.
home, that would have been
Funeral home / bookstore / dive bar / thrift store.
okay. Open this.
Business idea.
Imagine the loan application.
What category are you registering in as a business?
Oddity shop
Entertainment.
/ funeral home / bookshop / dive bar.
You know,
We contain multitudes.
You get it, right? You get it.
you get it. We're
Maybe
vibing.
some plant store pop-ups on
Oh,
weekends.
definitely
Andrew's like,
plants.
I'm gonna click entertainment, etc.
Oddities
Oh, yeah.
plus tit-shaped
Retail.
planters. Yeah.
With a redemption center out back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Recycling hub. Yeah.
Mhm.
My God.
And
Oh my God,
and
I'm going to
smash
start
burgers.
sketching now. Oh yeah, and like a burger restaurant or whatever.
Yeah, people get hungry.
At a funeral home.
Yeah,
They do.
they do.
I mean, that's
We did. We brought snacks to Jessica's funeral.
Yes, we did.
Sure did.
I
We
was
snuck
eating them
M&Ms into her
throughout.
coffin.
We did sneak M&Ms into her coffin.
I was snacking during the eulogies.
Got to.
Okay, so
That's what she would have wanted.
It is.
it is. So at just 20 years old, Frances published her first book of poetry titled Forest Leaves, and then in some iterations it was entitled Autumn Leaves.
House of Leaves.
House
Oh,
of Leaves.
God.
Thick.
The hardest book to read ever written.
I own
Have
it.
you
I
read it?
I have not attempted
I own it
yet.
and I have attempted it, and it's nuts.
I own it and I've read it and I liked it. Don't fucking ask me what it's about though. I don't know.
It's about a house that looks
It's a
way smaller
trip.
on the outside.
Yeah, okay. It's a fucking trip.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this book was thought to be completely lost to history until a single copy was discovered in Baltimore by a scholar named Johanna Ortner in the 2010s. So how
So
cool
how
is
many
that?
copies did she couldn't publish that many copies?
Probably
Probably
didn't
not.
publish that many copies, and a lot didn't survive, and then they found this one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
So then in 1850, when Frances was 26, she left Baltimore after accepting a job teaching home ec. God damn it. At Union Seminary, this like brilliant
Mm-hmm.
poet and author. They're like, you're a woman. You can
Yeah,
teach
you
home
can do
ec."
this.
She's like, I'm not married or a mom, but yeah, I guess I can fucking sew some shit. A school for Black students near Columbus, Ohio. And here she was blazing yet another trail as the school's first female teacher. Not long after she made this move, however, her home state of Maryland passed a law, or like started enforcing an old law, I think, stating that free African Americans were no longer to be permitted to enter the state of Maryland. And if found, they could be imprisoned and sold into slavery.
Yes.
Oh God.
Like previously free Blacks
Mm-hmm.
could become enslaved.
Was that super uncommon?
I don't think so. I mean, like, even in 12 Years a Slave is that the movie is based on true events, and there were like hustles
Yeah.
and wranglers to literally round up free Black Americans or formerly enslaved Black Americans to basically sell them back into
Yeah.
slavery in other
I've
states.
I've
So I'm sure
heard of
stuff
that.
like that.
I've heard of that in a lot of like movies, but I don't know if it's like exaggerated. Probably
no,
not.
that absolutely happened. There were absolutely like bounty hunters who would track down and find
Right.
formerly enslaved people who had escaped and become free that way.
Okay.
And sometimes if they were, particularly ruthless, whatever, sometimes they would like fudge the identities and like literally just kidnap free
I was
Black
gonna
people.
say, like, not in the cases of escaped enslaved people, but in the cases of Black
I think it's
Americans
safe
who've been
to
free their
assume-
whole lives.
I think it's safe to assume that under the right circumstances, any Black Americans, born free or otherwise, were susceptible to that kind of.
Yeah. I think that
I can't
definitely
imagine
happened.
that.
It's
That's
not like
just
we
the
had like
worst thing in the
fingerprinting and
world.
like
Right.
databases of identities. Like I think if they could get away with it, they fucking did it.
Mhm.
Oh God,
But-
I can't.
This is even more kind of like, I mean, what can be more malicious than that? But like this basically at the time, and I started to go down this rabbit hole and we can't get into all of it, but at the time, more and more enslaved Blacks in Maryland were being manumitted or set free in quotes by their white enslavers because the agriculture needs were changing, and so like the white enslavers didn't need the labor of enslaved people as much, and so they didn't want to like pay to like feed them anymore.
Right.
And so they were setting free, again, in quotes, like large swathes of these formerly enslaved people in Maryland. And the government was like, we don't want a bunch of free Black people running around. We need to get them out of here. And so they passed these laws or started enforcing these old laws on the books that they were like, any like new and free Black people who come into Maryland or like cross state lines into Maryland,
Immigrants.
can just be enslaved and sent elsewhere, basically.
Got it.
So it's to terrorize free Black people in the state, to make them want to leave the state.
Right.
So at this time, about 49% of Black people in Maryland were free, and they're dealing with all these different laws. And so some of these laws included state-sponsored schemes to transport free Black people, basically ship them off to,
Deport.
but deport, except they were born in the U.S.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Ship them off to fucking Liberia, which was like
Literally Liberia.
literally Liberia. There
Oh
was like
my
a tiny colony there that had been redubbed the Republic of Maryland.
Oh my
And like
God.
more than 1,000 people were shipped over to Liberia with no money, resources, assets,
Connections.
consent, anything.
Oh my God, that's awful.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Oh yeah. So that's a whole different rabbit hole.
Yeah.
There's a lot of rabbit holes in this
There's
episode.
so many rabbit holes.
Yeah.
And then also Maryland put up a thing where formerly enslaved people who had been manumitted were, and again, this is before the Emancipation Proclamation. This is people who were manumitted by their former enslavers, were given a deadline to get the fuck out of Maryland because, quote, unemployed adult free people of color without visible means of support could be re-enslaved at the discretion of local sheriffs. So it's basically if you're a free Black adult and you don't have legal employment, we'll just round you up and sell you back into slavery.
Or what's a visible means of support? Employment?
Employment.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
There's still vagrancy laws today. Anyway, so when this horror of a free Black person being enslaved, like re-enslaved, happened to a Maryland man in 1853. And then he subsequently died trying to escape his re-enslavement. A switch was flipped for Frances, and soon thereafter she left her teaching job, teaching home ec, and devoted herself full-time for abolitionist causes and her writing career. So she was like, this is fucked. You know, her uncle / father figure was a staunch abolitionist. So she was like, I need to just focus on this because this is fucking wild what's going on. So she moved in with William and Letitia George Still, who were prominent abolitionists and friends of her uncle. And then William Still would eventually become known as the, quote, father of the Underground Railroad, which I didn't know. I'd actually never even heard of him.
His name sounded familiar. There we go.
There you go. So she was supported financially by them. Basically, they recognized her talent for writing and speaking publicly on these issues. And they were like, okay, don't worry about like a 9-to-5 job. Focus on this work and like you can live with us and we'll like pay for your room and board and stuff.
Right.
So Frances began writing poetry for anti-slavery newspapers. Her second book, Poems on Miscellaneous Subjects, I know, was published in 1854, and it was so popular that it would be reprinted several times in the coming years.
Wow.
Around this time, she also joined the American Anti-Slavery Society and became a traveling lecturer, which is like still hard today.
Yeah.
To have that be your life, and she managed to do this as a single woman of color in 1854.
That's fucking incredible, especially given all that shit that was happening. God.
So in 1854, she delivered her first anti-slavery speech, which she titled, quote, The Elevation and Education of Our People. It was such a success, and her speeches came to be in such high demand that she spent most of her time between 1856 and 1860 traveling around the eastern and midwestern states, as well as Canada, and delivering lectures. Throughout, though, Frances faced intense gender and racial discrimination, something that she was extremely open about in her speeches. And I just love this next part because it definitely like slaps us Northerners in the face for like thinking that we're so superior when it comes to these issues when we're fucking not. So on one occasion, while delivering a speech in Pennsylvania, she stated, "Now let me tell you about Pennsylvania. I have been traveling nearly 4 years and have been in every New England state, in New York, Canada, Ohio. But of all these places, this is about the meanest of all."
Oh.
Not a fan of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
It was us in Cleveland.
She is making it clear.
That's brave.
Yeah. In 1858, so literally before the Civil War, Frances refused to ride in the, quote, colored section of a segregated trolley car in Philadelphia.
Oh my God.
This was 97 years before Rosa Parks.
Damn.
Holy shit.
I mean,
Epic.
She is brave.
yeah. Throughout
Not
her long...
fucking around.
I know. Throughout her long lecture tour, Frances never stopped writing. She published about 80 poems in numerous anti-slavery journals. In 1859, she published a short story called The Two Offers in the Anglo-African newspaper, which made her the first Black woman to publish a short story in, I don't know about North America, but definitely in the U.S. Between 1868 and 1888, she had 3 novels she had written serialized in newspapers. And in 1892, she published a novel called Lola Leroy, which was one of the first novels by a Black woman to be published in the U.S.
Who has the time?
I
How does
know.
she have all this time?
Books of poetry, speaking engagements, constantly on the road, constantly traveling, and also writing novels.
Yeah.
She's basically
And,
Stacey Abrams.
Upending, racial segregation rules all over the country.
Right.
So throughout her long and prolific writing career, Frances remained dedicated to the cause of civil rights and served as a mentor to many other Black writers and journalists. In 1860, Frances Watkins married a widower named Fenton Harper and began...
Fenton.
Fenton.
That's a cute name. Oh, wait, fentanyl. Never mind.
Yeah. It's ruined. It's like everything else. Using his last name. So that's where we get the Harper, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper.
Got it.
The couple had a daughter together whom they named Mary Frances Harper, and Frances also helped raise his 3 children from a previous marriage. So now she's also a fucking mom and a stepmom.
Mm-hmm.
God.
I know.
Because with all that time she has.
She's a powerhouse.
Right.
I love her.
Also, like, what is 1860 minus 1825? How old is she at this point?
35.
Okay, so all this, and she's our age.
Mm-hmm.
And to have your first child at 35 back then
Yeah.
could not have been easy.
Mm-mm.
It's not fucking easy now.
Mm-hmm.
So, sadly, Fenton Harper, her husband, died only 4 years after they got married.
Oh.
After the Civil War ended, Frances Watkins Harper, along with her daughter Mary, moved to the South to teach newly freed Black people during the Reconstruction era.
Good.
So that also takes
God.
fucking guts.
Mm-hmm.
Be like, I'm
Yeah.
gonna go into the fray.
With my daughter.
Yeah,
Mhm.
she went where she felt the need was strongest.
Yeah. I mean,
Jesus.
and this is not to devalue anything that this amazing woman is doing, but it's not like there was really anywhere that's going to be safe from all of these issues.
Safer than the South.
Right.
In
I
this
suppose
era.
in some ways protected by law, but
Yeah.
she's definitely facing these same deeply horrific, like intersectional challenges
Mm-hmm.
kind of wherever she goes. So I think that speaks to like what you're saying, Kenyon, even deeper, that she's going where like the need is greatest.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So by this point, she's a household name in a lot of circles, especially abolitionist circles. In the years following the Civil War, she was involved in promoting numerous progressive causes, including prohibition. So not everyone can be right all the time. We'll forgive you, Frances, for supporting prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
And also women's suffrage. So at
Well,
one point,
also, just to back up what Amanda was saying, like the tension,
Mm-hmm.
she was like a prominent figure, so she was a target, and she was just following wherever like the strongest tension was.
Yeah.
she was a
I think the-
target. She
the
was a
fact that
woman of color. She was
Yeah.
a single mom.
She's got a target on her fucking back.
Yeah. I mean, she's fucking badass.
That's wild.
So at one point, she joined forces with Frances Willard, a women's suffragist and president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Again, I'm sorry, you can't. It's an unfortunate
Can't
part of
win
her
'em all.
legacy.
Can't win them all.
One source states that, quote, activists like Harper and Frances Willard campaigned not only for racial and sexual equality, but also for a new understanding of the federal government's responsibility to protect rights, regulate morality, and promote social welfare. But she soon became disillusioned, and she felt that Willard only gave priority to white women's concerns and ignored her efforts to promote racial justice, such as, working towards an anti-lynching law, or the abolition of the convict lease system, which was basically just slavery by another name, along with prisons in post-Civil War South. Although she would continue to collaborate with white activists, Frances came to feel that it was extremely important that Black people have their own organizations where they could set their own priorities and not always be made to feel like second-class citizens, even within activist circles.
Or like a perk, like, oh, women get the right to vote, and that's like the cherry on top. I guess we'll, give some to Black women or whatever.
Or just
Like a side note.
she's
an
working so
afterthought.
hard. She's so brilliant. She's never going to be given a leadership position in these like women's suffragette movements because there are all these white women clogging the
Right.
fucking leadership boards.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1866, she delivered a speech at the National Women's Rights Convention in New York City titled, "We Are All Bound Up Together," in which she stated, quote, "We are all bound up together in one great bundle of humanity, and society cannot trample on the weakest and feeblest of its members without receiving the curse in its own soul. You tried that in the case of the Negro. You white women speak here of rights. I speak of wrongs. I, as a colored woman, have had in this country an education which has made me feel as if I were in the situation of Ishmael. Which I don't really understand. My hand against every man and every man's hand against me. While there exists this brutal element in society which tramples upon the feeble and treads down the weak, I tell you that if there is any class of people who need to be lifted out of their airy nothings and selfishness, it is the white women of America.
Oh.
Still true.
Oh, yeah.
So after this speech,
Mm-hmm.
um,
I'm sure that turned off some of the white
I think
women
there was
in the
some
room.
fan waving.
Mm-hmm.
Pearl
clutching.
Pearl clutching.
Pearl clutching. Mo in my hoop skirt.
I have to get some air.
I'm gonna write about this in my needlepoint.
Yes.
I hope someone's taking minutes.
Where do I leave a Yelp review?
Oh, Lord.
I want to speak to your
The
manager.
So they did agree to form the American Equal Rights Association, which specifically incorporated African American suffrage into the women's suffrage movement. But this organization was really short-lived, and it dissolved shortly after Congress proposed the 15th Amendment. Divide and conquer.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the suffragists in the AERA, most prominently Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, did not support the 15th Amendment. We already went into this. I'm not going to go into all of it. Frances, on the other hand, did not want to undermine the progress of Black men by pitting women's suffrage against Black suffrage. So she was kind of like, look, it doesn't have to be one or the other. But if they're handing out rights, take what you can now as long as you fucking help us later.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So as a result, this group divided into two separate groups, the National Woman Suffrage Association, which did not support the amendment, and the American Woman Suffrage Association, which did. So scholars of this time period have proposed that it was this suffrage split that alienated Frances Watkins Harper and other Black activists from the women's suffrage movement. Indeed, despite her dedication to and prolonged involvement with the movement, Frances Watkins Harper's name is rarely mentioned in connection with women's suffrage today, and I had never heard of her.
Mm-hmm.
And
I had never heard her name until I started research for this episode, which is
Right.
a
Yeah.
tragedy.
Yeah. So after this split, Frances spent the rest of her life working in the pursuit of equal rights, job opportunities, and education for Black women. She was the co-founder and vice president of the National Association of Colored Women's Clubs and the director of the American Association of Colored Youth. How did she find the time?
I know. I'm like,
I barely have the energy to talk about her accomplishments.
I have no resume, and her resume.
That is how lazy I am. I'm just like, oh, I'm exhausted.
Her resume could fit on like a scroll the length of Pennsylvania Avenue, and I
Yeah.
have no my resume could
She's
fit
a
on
mother.
my resume could fit on this.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, is that a mini post-it?
Yep, it's a
Same.
mini post-it for those who are not yet on
I
Patreon.
thought you just had huge hands.
Nope. I'm a giantess.
It can fit on this.
This.
This is my bed. Here's my purple mattress.
Oh, cute.
So cute.
Okay, also some temperance stuff, but again, we're just gonna overlook that because didn't age well. So she
Not in this circle.
you know, on this house.
Not in this coven.
So
Not in my house.
Good Lord.
she lived a really long life, especially for the time period. She died of heart failure on February 22nd, 1911 at the age of 85.
Wow.
And she was buried in Eden
Who has the
Cemetery
time?
Seriously.
in her least favorite state, Pennsylvania.
Oh, no.
I know. Exhume Frances.
They're so mean.
Yeah, move the poor gal.
Exhume Francis. Let's start a petition.
She was buried next to her daughter, who actually died before she did, which is very sad.
All right, fine.
So exhume Mary too, I guess. On the occasion of the 2019 Smithsonian exhibit that re-examined the suffrage movement through a broader intersectional lens, historian Martha S. Jones said of her, quote, "The arc of her life is remarkable, but in her many embodiments, she tells us a story that women's lives aren't only one thing. And she tells us that the purpose of women's rights is to raise up all of humanity, men and women." Like, that is what feminism is. She persists in advocating for a set of values that reflect the principles of human rights today. And there is a memorial statue that was erected in 2020 to her in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.
This is the only good kind of erection. Let me tell you.
I mean,
That's my takeaway from this brilliant, beautiful woman's life.
A
better
man
than-
that perks up at erection.
There it is.
it's better than just a dick.
My God, can you imagine just a dick? I mean, actually, I do have that in my bedside table, and it's pretty great. But
The fact that anyone
it's
could look
erect.
at a flaccid penis and think that that was somehow superior. like fine, okay, they exist, like, great. I'm not, like, disparaging anyone who has a penis, but, like,
But if you're gonna look at one, it's better if it's erect, right?
oh my God.
oh, it's just, not into it. Not into
a
the
little-
flaccid.
Little sock. It's like when you pull off your no show at the end of a long day. It's like all kind of
I also
bunched
hate
up.
that.
Smells and sights.
well, who's gonna use that? It's not good.
Ugh.
Anyway.
Equality.
On that note,
Are we ready for my case?
I don't know.
maybe.
My case is not about women's suffrage. It's about the inventor of no-shows and how much I hate them.
Oh,
Oh my God, you
suffer.
really had me for a second. I was like,
I
what's
took
it about?
suffrage to a totally different, I intentionally misunderstood suffrage.
Oh, I thought it was women suffering. I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Sorry. I'm just kidding. I'm covering the fan pick case today. So I am talking about Alice Powell,
Yes.
who was born in 1885, only 32 years before Helen.
She could have held Helen as a
But
baby.
she could have literally held Helen.
She nannied for
There's
Helen.
no way to know she didn't. No, she didn't. She was born in my favorite U.S. state, New Jersey.
Oh, God.
Better than Pennsylvania. Just
I
kidding.
mean-
I actually love Pennsylvania.
Me too. She was the oldest of 4 kids to wealthy parents, Tracy and William Powell. Excuse me, one of my Tums trying to come up. William was a, quote, Quaker businessman, which I had to look up because I could only picture this meant selling oats, and honestly, I wasn't that far off. This
Was
search
he a
brought me...
Quaker who was a businessman?
This is like a whole thing. This search brought me to quakersintheworld.org, which says, quote, Quakers sought enterprises that were non-military and also useful. The, quote, innocent trades.
Oh, yeah. Peaceful.
They pioneered-
Pacifist.
Yeah, they pioneered the mass production of iron, and there were mining and metal production concerns, all central to the early Industrial Revolution, alongside older occupations such as wool and cloth production, farming, craft, and shopkeeping. They made domestic china, cast iron utensils, engine and railway components, medicines, chocolate, and much else, end quote.
Oh, those Quakers.
This also made me cringe laugh. Quote, Quaker communities oversaw local Quaker businesses in order to maintain these standards and prevent over-indebtedness and bankruptcy. They also regulated the master-servant and employer-employee relationships in the interest of equality and fairness.
And BDSM.
Ah, yes,
not
the
good.
equality of the master-servant relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Ah, yes.
Oh, yes. No. Nothing to see here, folks.
Ah,
I thought
yes.
the Quakers
Don't
were all
look it up.
abolitionists.
I mean,
There must have been a range.
I'm sure there's a range.
All
I
right.
think they were like pacifists, but also
Right.
at the time, who knew?
Maybe
what-
there was
like,
a schism.
The
Yeah.
ethics and morals of racial
Quakers.
relations were
Mhm.
all over the place.
Yeah. So Alice's parents were progressive for white folks at the time, at least when it came to women's rights. They supported women's access to education, business involvement, and voting rights. Alice's mother had been involved with the suffrage movement, and as a child, Alice would attend women's suffrage meetings with her mother, Tracy.
Cool.
She pursued an advanced education, and her education is bonks. It's peppered throughout this entire case. It's like you're saying, where do you find the time? She enrolled in one of the few schools at the time that allowed women, the Swarthmore College, which was actually co-founded by her grandfather. That's like a Quaker-founded school.
Wow.
Yeah. She graduated with a degree in biology in 1905 before attending what is now known as Columbia University in New York. At the time, it was the New York School of Philanthropy.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. And
Philanthropy.
yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of legacy, like social work through Columbia, I guess, before this. She got her master's in sociology in 1907 there. She spent a couple years in England studying social work and then came back to the States to get a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania in
Jesus
1910.
Swarthmore, Columbia, UPenn. Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
England.
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
While she was studying in the UK, she got involved in their suffrage movement and returned to the States with skills in protesting, picketing, and hunger strikes, all tactics that were being used by suffrage leaders in the UK. After wrapping up her PhD, she joined the National American Woman Suffrage Association, the NAWSA. And focused her energy on lobbying Congress for a constitutional amendment granting women the right to vote. This was actually a divisive choice with the NAWSA because their focus was on state campaigns, despite the word national being in their name.
A small detail.
Yeah, just, it's fine.
Let's split hairs.
It's just states everywhere. And Alice wanted this to be, well, national. So she and a few others who agreed with her approach separated from NAWSA and formed the National Women's Party. Alice is a big reason why the Women's March that occurs in March almost every year is a thing. So she was skilled in big group assembly, parades, pickets, and marches, and her first ever U.S. march was also the largest that she organized. It took place in Washington, D.C. on March 3rd, 1913, which was the day before Woodrow Wilson's presidential inauguration.
Mm-hmm.
The march as we know it today, unfortunately, still suffers from a lot of the same issues it did at its inception, with the exclusion of women of color from planning committees and leadership roles. Today, many trans women, femmes, and women of color are rightfully criticizing the abundance of toxic white feminism surrounding the Women's March and how it's ignoring the presence of racism and transphobia from the women's movement.
There's also a lot of anti-Semitism going on.
Yeah.
So Alice Paul was not an exception to this racism, and while she was initially recruiting both black and white women to march, she was part of discussions about segregating participants based on race to the back of the march.
Can you? Oh my fucking God.
Yeah.
That is just.
Like,
She was
get
either
to the
like-
back of the march.
Yeah. She was either like, well, all of the black participants can march in the back, or a lot of the marches were like, they were all grouped by what state they were representing.
Okay.
So it's like, or we'll just default to what your state's leader says at the march, where you can march, is basically how that went.
Oh my
God.
fucking God.
Yeah.
That is
But
just.
the idea of just letting them participate within the same parameters as the white marchers
Unthinkable.
was
Pretty much.
not even on the table. Okay,
Yeah.
That
got
is
it.
just like such a manifestation of everything we've been talking about.
Oh,
the
yeah.
fact that like as human beings, they marching for equality still had this mindset as their default.
Like I said, they're white first, they're women second.
Oh,
Yeah.
1,000%.
Yeah.
So yeah, she was part of discussions about segregating participants based on race to the back of the march and willing to align herself with anti-blackness to secure the vote. This is from the Tennessee Tribune. Quote, initially, Paul had reached out to invite black women in Washington, D.C., especially the members of Howard University's Delta Sigma Theta sorority, to take part in the parade. Facing criticism and the threat that white Southern women might pull out, Paul recalculated and drew a line. The parade was to be, quote, a purely suffrage demonstration entirely uncomplicated by any other problems such as racial
Who's
ones.
complicating it? By
Racial
setting
ones.
up where people can march.
Yeah.
You're complicating it.
Precisely.
Yeah, you're organizing this shit. Figure it out.
Oh my God.
Paul imagined she knew best, continuing on to say, quote, Our winning suffrage will be the thing that will most raise the state of Negro women.
How?
End quote.
Doesn't seem like it, since you're making us march in the back.
Right.
But it's the best they can hope to get.
Right.
Let's just give this to them.
And as we've been discussing throughout this episode, this is still the foundation of like toxic white feminism today, ignoring other intersections of oppression and thinking that aligning with just whiteness to get rights will bring rights to all, when we know historically that isn't true. So again, from the Tennessee Tribune, quote, Mary Church Terrell, a black woman, was a former head of the National Association of Colored Women and a Washington, D.C. power broker who traveled home from New York to march. Terrell had always kept one foot in suffrage association politics and knew its shortcomings well. Neither Ida B. Wells nor Terrell frequented Alice Paul's circles, but they appeared on that day to make plain that black women would never cede the question of their voting rights to others. Mm-hmm. Wells and Terrell were not alone. Most of the 24 or so black women marchers were local residents of Washington, D.C., including the sculptor May Howard Jackson, the director of the Washington Conservatory of Music, Harriet Gibbs Marshall, pharmacists and drugstore owners, Dr. Amanda Gray and Dr. Ava Ross, and a contingent of college women that included Oberlin College graduate and advocate for early childhood education, Anna Evans Murray, M Street School French instructor Georgia Simpson, and Smith College graduate Harriet Schad. Howard University students also joined the procession decked out in caps and gowns. So it was like, we're representing us.
Yeah.
We're fucking amazing. Mm-hmm. We don't trust white ladies to get us what we need. Mm-hmm. Rightfully so.
They have some good ass representation too. Like those are all amazing people.
Yeah. So the group of 8,000 women were met by about 500,000 spectators, some supporting the action, but most opposing and heckling.
Ugh.
They did get President Wilson's attention, though, because he agreed to a meeting with Alice and other suffrage leaders to discuss a constitutional amendment. He ultimately decided, however, that it, quote, wasn't the right time to make that change.
Oh, okay.
Alice wasn't deterred by this, but instead fortified her efforts and founded the Congressional Union for Woman Suffrage with the express mission of lobbying Congress for this constitutional amendment. She launched a campaign in 1917 that coordinated about 2,000 volunteers to picket the White House around the clock for 18 months. It was an occupation of the White House. Mm-hmm. These volunteers were known as, quote, silent sentinels who would gather with signs at the White House in peaceful protest, dress all in white, silent, and working in shifts over almost 2 years.
Jesus. And if you've ever been to D.C. in the summer, and you can imagine what layers and yards of fabric they had on.
Mm-hmm. I mean, they started in January, but they had to go through some hot months.
That's 2 summers.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. So they maintained a presence 6 days a week, holding banners demanding the right to vote, but were met with violence by both citizens in opposition and, of course, the police. Picketing had been legalized in 1914, so the silent sentinels weren't breaking any laws, but mass arrests on flimsy charges like obstructing traffic, like horse-drawn traffic.
Fucking still how they arrest people today.
1,000%. It's going to sound real familiar. And police brutality were common at these demonstrations. The media went nuts covering these injustices. Some were like really shining a light, some media outlets, on how fucked up the government response was to this, while obviously many others were like, well,
shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, play stupid games, get stupid prizes. Yeah.
They did break the law, technically.
Right.
Yeah.
They deserve to be met with lethal force. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The Boston Journal wrote, quote, the little band representing the NWP has been abused and bruised by government clerks, soldiers, and sailors until its efforts to attract the president's attention has sunk into the conscience of the whole nation. So
we're like passersby essentially like grabbing them and
I mean, shit like that was happening. Like they were being heckled and harassed
all
fucking constantly. Day and night, 6 days a week. Mm-hmm. So President at the time, Wilson, pardoned a few of the arrested women at first, but that was mostly for show, and the pardons pretty quickly stopped. When Alice was arrested, she actually advocated for the maximum sentence for herself to, like, make a statement, and was put in jail for 7 months. While jailed, she began a hunger strike. She was threatened with institutionalization in an insane asylum, which is what it would have been referred to at the time, moved to the prison psych ward, brutalized, and force-fed raw eggs through a tube in response to her strike.
Jesus
God.
Christ. She could have died from the eggs.
I know. Well, she later stated, quote, "It was shocking that a government of men could look with such extreme contempt on a movement that was asking nothing except such a simple thing as the right to vote." Mm-hmm. She would be arrested several times afterward as she continued organizing pickets for the vote. She also eventually became a vegetarian because she couldn't stomach the thought of I know a lot of vegetarians will eat eggs, but the thought of just the
some of the shit that she was fed. Yeah.
Yeah. The conditions in these prisons, it's bad now, but it was unfathomable in the early 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
That takes some fucking bravery. There's no way that I would have the strength to go on a hunger strike. There's just no fucking way.
I literally
I would
couldn't.
cave. Well, yeah, you literally could not. I would fucking cave so fast.
I prioritize my comfort
Mm-hmm.
at an extreme level.
Yeah.
It's, Yep.
I'm selfish. I could never be as strong as these women.
No.
Period. Full stop.
So after the 19th Amendment was ratified, Alice pursued a law degree because she just loves education. From
She already
Washington.
has a PhD, right?
Oh, there's more.
Okay.
A law degree from Washington College of Law and a master's and doctorate degrees from American University.
Get it?
She's
All right.
a doctor, a lawyer. She's every member of what is it called? Who are the
Village
YMCA?
people.
The village people, except a cop.
She's
She's a fireman.
U.S.
Village
News
person.
and World Report.
Yeah. In 1923, she drafted the first Equal Rights Amendment to the Constitution, but it failed to pass. She remained committed to the women's rights movement throughout her life, lobbying Congress successfully for gender equality to be included in the preamble to the United Nations Charter and the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which also encompassed the Voting Rights Act. Mm-hmm. So this is from Wikipedia. Quote, "The prohibition on sex discrimination was added to the Civil Rights Act by Howard W. Smith, a powerful Virginia Democrat who chaired the House Rules Committee. Smith's amendment was passed by a teller vote of 168 to 133. For 20 years, Smith had sponsored the Equal Rights Amendment in the House because he believed in equal rights for women, even though he opposed equal rights for Black people.
There's a theme. There's a theme happening here.
For decades, he had been close to the National Women's Party and especially to Paul. So I know we've beaten this dead horse, but I'm just going to read the last part that I wrote. This is just something we as white women need to be mindful and critical of when discussing and celebrating the suffrage movement and the 19th Amendment. It did come at a cost to women of color who did not get the vote at a national level ratified by the Constitution until the passage of the 1965 Civil Rights Act. So that's nuts. So while suffragettes like Alice Paul promised that getting white women the vote would open the door to women of color to get the vote, they quickly abandoned that sentiment once they got what they wanted, which is an act that's all too common, including now.
Yeah. It doesn't affect you.
Right.
You don't have the energy to fight
not my
for
problem.
it. Yeah.
Alice Paul died at the ripe old age of 92 and has been immortalized in multiple halls of fame by the U.S. Mint on a $10 gold coin and by Hilary Swank, who played her in the film Iron-Jawed Angels in 2004.
That is.
Which our
quite
fan picker
possibly-
recommended.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say what I was about to say.
The worst movie you've ever seen.
I've never seen it, but I was going to say that is quite possibly the worst film title I've ever heard.
It's Charlie's Angels 2, The Iron-Jawed Angels.
I know. Can you imagine somebody turning that on and being like, "Oh, Hilary Swank is in the new Charlie's Angels." Wait.
Oh, this
wait.
is not what I thought I was ordering on Amazon Prime. Oh, God.
I'm sure there's a reason they
Did you
called
rent
it
or
that.
buy?
I'm sure.
But
As
yes.
someone who rarely reads the synopsis when I see a movie title that I think I get, I would be like, "Oh, is this the Charlie's Angels with Kristen Stewart?
Iron-Jawed Angels.
I love her."
Well, Ani Davis recommends that movie.
All right. Well, thank you, Ani Davis, for letting us get on our soapboxes.
Yeah.
God, for giving us the box.
Yeah. This is your fault, and we love you.
Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.
Ah!